Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney Cowie, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. All right, Brehan Crawford, I'm so excited to have you on today. So you're known for your 15 years of success treating patients with chronic infections and post-infectious syndromes like long COVID and conditions like fibromyalgia, IBS, and POTS, which is an autoimmune disorder. And I know that you do a lot of just social media content to explain the principles of traditional Chinese medicine. There's a very deep need for this, I feel like, too. Just what is Chinese medicine? What is classical Chinese medicine? We're going to be talking about that today. You're the co-founder of Chorus for Life, a company devoted to helping people eat food and live in the real world without hurting. So I'm super excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me. If you don't mind, I might have you start by just talking about your own gut health story and what that looked like and how that led you into becoming interested in Chinese medicine.
Okay, yeah, happy to. Thank you for having me on the show. So, when I was 2 years old, I got a really serious case of pneumonia, and it became a kidney infection. It went systemic. I was hospitalized and given intravenous antibiotics, which saved my life, but also destroyed my guts. And from that, prior to that point, I had been a normal, healthy kid. Catch colds, get over them, that kind of thing, no big deal. And after that, my parents told me initially, because I don't really remember that point in my life, but I remember being a small child and having severe dietary restrictions. I remember my stomach hurting all the time. I remember having a lot of episodes of things that would later get labeled as IBS, even though, we know now that's just kind of a catch-all diagnosis that means you have gut problems, tummy issues, bathroom troubles, and your doctor doesn't really know why. And so my parents tried all kinds of stuff. They tried giving me yogurt. They tried taking me to many different kinds of physicians, natural, conventional, etc., and trying all kinds of very restrictive diets. I was told at one point in my life I could not eat like wheat or dairy. And so I eliminated those things from my diet. Couldn't eat sugar, couldn't eat very specific fruits. I don't remember, I like citrus or something like that. And then, what my whole life thinking I couldn't have those things, still had a lot of stomach problems and became morbidly obese.
Oh,
And in my 20s, decided I really wanted to take charge of my own health. I was really unhappy. I was, not in a great place digestively either or mentally, and started really working on learning how to eat a nutritious diet, get lots of exercise, figured that was the key to health. It got me some part of the way, but didn't ultimately fix the underlying stomach problems. And so through my eventual Chinese medicine education and the things I was exposed to through that with diet methods, not just like specific foods for a restrictive diet, but what kinds of food should you eat to promote health? And
mhm.
then herbal medicine, qigong, specific kinds of exercise, martial arts, and breath work and self massage and things like that. Found my way back to very robust gut health, and a decent shaped body and a very happy mind, and have made it my career to just try and help other people find their way back to the same place.
I love that. So just a question of curiosity, with some of the restrictive diet approaches, were these doctors doing like food sensitivity testing or just kind of randomly giving you, to their best guess, like foods they thought you should avoid?
It was all over the place. I remember there was a naturopath who said he was really into these food combinations. And he said, okay, Brian can have wheat and he can have dairy, but he can't have them at the same time.
Oh God, that's so
And,
confusing.
and so it's like, okay, well, pizza's out, but I can eat a bagel and then 4 hours later I can have a bucket of cream cheese. Like that, it was weird. There were people who did muscle testing. There were people who did what did they do? I had some skin scratch tests and like more conventional Western medicine allergy tests. I don't think those actually showed anything. And when I had that done, and then there were also always people being like, "Oh, you just need to be vegetarian. Oh no, you need to just eat only meat. Oh, you need to just, think like scroll social media and you'll see 15 different dietary recommendations. And there's a medical time and place for those kinds of restrictions, I think. But for the most part, I think the emphasis is really overblown on restrictive eating as being a therapeutic modality that'll fix anything that's wrong with your digestive system. And it's not. In fact, it makes a lot of people worse to withhold those foods. And we now have very clear evidence on things like dairy, for example, that if you're lactose intolerant, some people, not all, and there's nuance to this, but there is tons of evidence showing that just including very small amounts of dairy for a long enough period of time helps you. It helps you create the enzymes and feed the bacteria that you need to break that down and digest it and absorb the nutrients without suffering. That's not to say that dairy is a health food that everybody should be eating, especially in large quantities. But
Mhm.
they're, you know, like what is a life without cheese? Like, and small amounts of things should be included. I like people to get to a place where they can eat a wide variety of foods. Not to say that they shouldn't, not to say that they should have tons and tons of it, but being able to go out to dinner, eat with friends and family, enjoy a wedding banquet or something like that on occasion and not suffer for it is, I think, a really good goal to have.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I too have that same goal with the clients I work with. We often do use some sort of elimination diet in the very beginning. But as you know, a lot of people come in and they're eating kind of anything and everything, often very nutrient poor processed
Yeah.
foods, which is, we can talk about
Yeah.
what that kind of means from Chinese medicine perspective. And we'll get in kind of the concept of qi and what that is, right? But, ultimately, you don't wanna have to live there, That's really it kind of starts to tread into that whole mental, emotional stress of just feeling like you can't leave the house and, like you said, you can't participate in life normally, and then the impact that ultimately starts to have on health too, right? So there
Yeah.
needs to be kind of this overarching plan, I think, that even if you're going to go there and strategically avoid certain trigger foods, how can we work deeper in the body, whether you're doing it from a Chinese medicine perspective or another, functional holistic perspective that gets at the root cause and kind of builds that person up to a place where they're strong enough to handle, a
Yeah. Very
more
much.
robust diet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's somebody, yeah, and I don't mean to say that people should just throw caution to the wind with their food choices either. Like obviously there are people who have really severe anaphylactic allergic reactions to some things. Probably best to avoid those, like
Yes.
completely. And
Yes.
sometimes like there are rare circumstances where that can be reduced or reversed, but for the most part, that you have that kind of reaction, that food should not be part of your life forever. Alpha gal is a great situation like that. Like those people, no
Yes.
red meat. Do not eat red meat. Like that is a bad idea. Um, but or people with celiac disease, absolutely must avoid gluten. Uh,
Yes.
but if you have symptoms, yeah, cut that out of your diet, but then fix the underlying problem so that you can bring it back in, or at least not be so fragile in its presence. Like be more resilient if somebody accidentally doses you with something.
Yeah, for sure. So this kind of segues into just a very foundational concept in Chinese medicine that I'd love to have you talk about, which is this idea of qi, right? And this is probably a brand new concept if the listener is not familiar with Chinese medicine, but I actually find that this whole concept of qi really does sort of permeate in some ways functional medicine, just a lot of holistic approaches because, it talks about basically our body's inherent ability to kind of have this intelligence, right? But I'll let you dive into that, Brehan. You talk a little bit about qi and what
Okay.
that is. Yeah.
So the character for qi in Chinese, the language is, they don't have an alphabet, they have ideograms. And so the character for qi is a picture of steam rising off of a pot of boiling rice. And from
Mhm.
that we can take a lot of information. So a lot of people in the West especially hear the word chi and they think of like the emperor in Star Wars shooting blue lightning bolts out of his fingertips, or they think of Avatar, the Last Airbender, like that cartoon where they're using principles from Asian medicine and martial arts traditions, which are beautifully portrayed. And there's a lot of wonderful messages in that show, but it's magic. And chi, like the character chi, it is something that what it describes is something that is subtle. It's something that is warm. It's something that has a lifting quality to it, but
Mhm.
it is physical. It's not it is energetic in that it has heat, and it's energetic in that it's moving, but it's vapor. It is something that you can see that anybody, you stand next to somebody on a cold day where the steam hits the wet pavement and you see the steam rising off of it, and you can be like, that's steam rising off the pavement. You don't have to meditate on a mountaintop for 40 years to figure out what that is. And to say to the person next to you, oh, do you see the chi? Like that's basically what that is. So in our bodies, in medicine, chi has many different functions, but the closest analog that we have to it is gas. And in fact, the word gas in Chinese, in like gasoline that you would put in your car, has the character qi in it. So it is energy in a sense that it gives you energy to do things. It gives you energy to move, like gasoline in your car. There's potential there, but it is a physical substance. It is energetic because it is warm, but it is not magic. It is actually chemistry. And so in our bodies, we have gases that are called gasotransmitters. And there's emerging science around this, but many of the common ones are very well understood and well documented, although they're not commonly discussed because they're so basic to human physiology. They're so basic to function of every tissue type, of every cell in our body that you it's with one notable exception, which I'll describe in a second. It's hard for pharmaceutical companies to manufacture medicines that affect them in a healthy way. And
Mhm.
so these gases, the main ones that we focus on are nitric oxide and hydrogen sulfide. So hydrogen sulfide correlates mostly with what we would call kidney chi. And so kidney chi is it's kind of the source of life. And if you think of this in a context of evolutionary biology, hydrogen sulfide is this really toxic, noxious gas produced from these like vents in the bottom of the ocean floor. It's coming from, volcanic activity under the surface of the earth. This is where life originated. And so it's the chemical processes that made that happen are still happening in our body to this day. And hydrogen sulfide represents a lot of that function. And so that's related to a lot of our endocrine system, our reproductive systems, and some kinds of gut function as well. There's a specific form of SIBO, of small intestine bacterial overgrowth, that is hydrogen sulfide SIBO. And so you have microbes in our guts that are producing that gas. And all of these gases, and this is consistent with chi theory, with the way that chi has classically always been described, is that it has to be in a Goldilocks zone to be working. If you have too much, it's poison. If you have not enough, it's deficiency. And it needs to be moving constantly because these are gases. If they coagulate, if they stagnate, you get problems there because you get a relative excess in that one location. Nitric
Mhm.
oxide is the one that controls a lot of things like vasodilation and vasoconstriction. It's produced also by many of the bacteria in our GI tract. It regulates a lot of things like our pores opening and closing. It regulates pain perception. It regulates gastric motility. And so nitric oxide is most of what we consider chi.
Perfect. So, kind of connect this in a little bit to maybe just how the movement of chi in the body can start to lead, or problems. And you kind of started to do that a little bit, but how that can start to lead to, especially like digestive dysfunction and disorders.
Okay. Yeah. So nitric oxide is the main one to focus on there, and all of the gasotransmitters, and these are that we have identified so far. So these are nitric oxide, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, ammonia, and then methane to a lesser degree.
Mhm.
These are all created by our gut flora. Our gut flora, because they are living organisms, are also very susceptible to different levels of them. And so they all have to exist in, like I was saying, a Goldilocks zone. And if you have too much of a certain gas, some species will thrive and others will perish. And vice versa, if you have too much, if you have too much nitric oxide, you get, or lots of nitric oxide, you get some species of flora. Some of those are good for you, some of them not so good. Context matters, location matters. Same thing with hydrogen sulfide, same thing with methane. We all have methanogens. Methanogen overgrowth or intestinal methanogen overgrowth is, again, one form of SIBO, also can be just one form of IBS that, famously causes terrible constipation for people. And
Mhm.
so getting those bacteria to regulate themselves in terms of their population, we take an approach towards that very much like gardening. where, you have a lot of plants in a garden bed or on a farm field, and you're going to get some weeds and you're going to get some, uh, some things you don't necessarily want, but it's a balance of fungus, bacteria, soil quality, heat, moisture, airflow, all of that creates.
Yeah. So how would Chinese medicine approach correcting some of these things? So kind of what I'm hearing you say is like, these different substances are connected with different populations of bacteria and the amounts that they are in the gut, right? And so um kind of where my brain's going is, oh, I bet herbs can do something to kind of influence that. But
Yeah,
yeah, talk a
yeah,
little bit
very
about
much
kind
so.
of how Chinese medicine would approach that.
Okay, so the ways that we look at it, so herbs are a great modality, and yes, herbs can directly affect certain species of bacteria, certain kinds of yeast, certain kinds of biofilm levels and microbes and things like that. The way we assess how we're going to approach a patient, though, is based on factors that we can objectively observe, and these are things like temperature, pressure, and moisture.
Mhm.
So, by asking the patient a couple of questions, things like inquiring about thirst, things about inquiring about sweat, inquiring about the quality or quantity or ease of bowel movement, we can distill, okay, what's going on with water? What's going on with moisture in the body? Are they too dry or are they too wet? Most of the patients that we see in the clinic these days, in fact, I would say about 90% of the patients that we see in the clinic in the modern era are on the too wet side of things. We are overall very damp. We don't get a lot of physical activity. We tend to be very sedentary. Our climate controlled environments tend to make it so that we are not bundling up as much as we should when it's cold outside, and sometimes not exposing ourselves to a lot of environmental heat when it's present. And so fluid
Mm.
becomes quite still in our bodies. The foods we eat are also extremely, for the most part, not always nutrient rich, but very calorie rich. And a
Mhm.
lot of these foods have things like excessive amounts of salt or starch in them, which are osmotic agents. So these are things that soak up moisture and hold moisture wherever they're moving. So if you think about like how do you brine a turkey for Thanksgiving, you're going to soak it in a salt brine or a sugar brine, like if a cured ham is soaked in sugar. And so these are things that, that's flesh, that's meat, and you put it in water with an osmotic agent like salt or sugar, and all of those cells in the meat swell up. And it's very
Mhm.
much the case in human tissue as well.
Mhm.
Uh, when we're talking about temperature, that's very much related to hot or cold, and you can tell this sometimes people will crave hot drinks only. They'll have a lot of internal cold, or they'll crave cold drinks only. They'll want ice water constantly. They will sometimes feel a sensation of cold pain in the abdomen. Like they feel like putting a heat pad on the abdomen would help them a lot. In fact, in a lot of times in Asia, you'll see, especially for kids with tummy trouble, they'll just put a hot water bottle or an electric heating blanket on the kid's abdomen, doing a little massage, get some friction, get some heat going in there, and then pressure as well. So pressure is, you can distill this, you can figure this out by asking somebody like, your abdominal symptoms, your digestive problems, are they better or worse after a bowel movement or after farting? Like if you
Mhm.
have too much pressure, bowel movement or flatulence is going to relieve that a little bit. May not be completely gone, may not go away for a long time, but just a little bit. It's okay. Okay, so it's that direction we need to move versus worse after a bowel movement will be too little pressure. Again, you can use your hands. Pushing on somebody's tummy, does that make it hurt more? Yes. Okay, well, you already have too much pressure. Heavy pressure and it feels really comforting, feels really good. That's a deficiency.
Yeah, no, those are great ways to look at it. And I love this because I think Chinese medicine really talks in very simple terms. It's a very beautiful way of understanding the body and how it works, but using things like deficiency, excess, warm, cold, right? Like these qualities to describe how things are functioning in the body helps then know which direction to go, whether you're going to use, say, like an herbal intervention or acupuncture. Do you do acupuncture as well, Brihan, as your clinic?
Yeah, I don't do, so I am an acupuncturist. I do some acupuncture. It's not the majority of my practice, although it has been at times in my clinical history. There's been years that I've done a lot of acupuncture. I'm not doing a ton right now,
Okay, okay.
but
So
it's
you
a
kind of
wonderful modality.
It is a wonderful modality, yeah, and I don't know, you can, feel free to disagree with me on this one, but I feel like sometimes with the GI stuff, actually herbs are gonna be a little bit quicker way to cut through and get to some of those issues. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, hard agree. Like,
Yeah,
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 no,
yeah.
so a lot of people in the West are familiar with acupuncture when it comes to Chinese medicine. That's the thing that's most commonly displayed here, in terms of the different modalities that Chinese medicine has to offer. In
Okay.
China, it's maybe 3% of Chinese medicine. Uh, 97%, whatever's left of that, is herbal medicine and qigong. So you see people in, there's pharmacies on every corner in a major city. And a major city in China is, 20 to 30 million people. Like there's a lot of herbs being used. Herbal medicine is extremely prevalent in the culture. Dietary therapy is part of that. They cook with herbs a lot of the time. And so if somebody in the family has a case of a tummy flu, they're going to be, everybody's drinking, san or something like that, like a formula that's really good for that. And they're probably going to be cooking with things like patchouli leaf, which, can um, uh, help with E. coli or something of that nature. Yeah, you'll also see people in the parks doing a lot of qigong exercises with each other, and it may not seem like that's a direct correlation to digestive health until you look at the data around like how social relationships influence neurotransmitters and happiness levels and how closely that's associated with gut function. And isolation is not healthy. So getting people out, moving together, dancing. I mean, just beyond the mechanical, like, you know, twisting the ribs and getting your guts moving. It's a daily walk for your mental health, but you're doing it with 1,000 of your closest friends to music. Like, it's great.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of from what I've heard too, is like in the realm of Chinese medicine, like breath and then obviously food for nourishment, but herbs are some of the like best ways to build up deficiency in the body, right? Because like with acupuncture, we could argue it helps to move and direct that chi, but not as effective as kind of like nourishing and building. Or would you disagree with that? I don't know. You tell me, Brehan.
I'd phrase it a little differently, but the concept is right.
Yeah.
So in cases of malabsorption, malnutrition, it may look like a nutrient deficiency,
Mm,
chemically. Like you could take a lab test and say like, oh, you're deficient in this vitamin, you must supplement with that vitamin. Well, sometimes iron's a great example of this. A lot of women will test to be iron deficient anemic. And they'll take supplements and get constipated. They'll eat meat and feel terrible and bloated, and their iron levels don't go up at all, and it's an absorption issue. Uh,
exactly.
and so we would use that is a deficiency, but it may actually be related to an intestinal overgrowth of a certain bacteria that we would actually treat that as an excess. We would use herbs in that circumstance to reduce the population of the bacteria that are causing the problem.
Yeah.
So, in a deficiency kind of situation, you might see somebody who has, the classic candida overgrowth picture. They take the appropriate herbs to reduce that excess, the excess candida for a few days. They get better, but then it comes right back, and those same herbs don't work a second time. They're also struggling with a deficiency of bacteria that produce nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, again, one of those things that are produced by some flora that help maintain a certain kind of homeostasis of different kinds of GI species. And so in
Mhm.
that circumstance, we would consider using herbs that have a bit more of what we would call a boosting effect, boosting species of flora that produce nitric oxide. And so those flora then kind of contribute towards homeostasis. And usually those are the kinds of things that you don't have to take them for that long. You do, 3 days to a week or two of herbs, and then these people are generally better as long as they can maintain a healthy diet from that point on.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And it's interesting because there's definitely parallels, I feel like, to how, I would look at this too, just from a functional nutrition perspective, where, yeah, using SIBO as an example, you can go in and you can use herbal products to kind of help eradicate that bacteria. But if there's this underlying weakness, like digestive weakness going on, and then you don't correct and support that, right? Like you're still not going to necessarily get to the root of, resolving that long term because often that type of problem
Yeah,
can come right back. So,
yeah,
yeah, it's kinda like the interesting complexity of what do you do when there's an excess present and also this underlying deficiency, which is where using these Chinese formulas that have herbs that kind of work at both ends or using one and then changing the strategy to another, I think can be really beneficial.
So with many chronic illnesses, and IBS or SIBO are great examples of this, we work in stages. So a lot of times people will come in thinking they have a diagnosis, and thus there is one treatment that will cure them, and they just need to do that, and then they'll be all better, and that's it. And the reality is that there are multiple contributing factors to chronic illness, which is why the conventional medical system often doesn't work really have great success rates with these patients.
Totally.
Is they're often looking for the one magic pill.
Right.
And sometimes there's one magic pill that can suppress symptoms enough that people go away, but they're not actually better. And
Yeah.
so, like what's a great example in the IBS world is like nortriptyline or something. Like sometimes people will take that and it's just like, okay, cool. Guts are working again. Where is my brain? And
Yeah. Yeah. It's
uh,
like the classic, let me give you an SSRI med for your IBS symptoms. It's like,
yeah.
what? You're going to treat my brain?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, there's a ton of neurotransmitter activity in the gut, and those medications can have some benefit for some people some of the time, but it's far from being the whole picture. And so
Oh,
if
for
we're
sure.
able to break it down into the different factors that are causing the illness to be there and then address them in the appropriate order, one at a time, people often find that they get a much better success rate from that.
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah, and just the other limitation in conventional medicine is it's also so compartmentalized, right? Like you go to the GI doc, they only look at your digestive system. And it's
Yes.
like, how far can you get with that, right? Which is like, I think one of the big realizations I had, as I'm sure you did too, when you were on your health journey, is like, okay, I've hit a wall now. Like this person only wants to keep looking at the same one thing over and over and over. Like there's got to be other things connected to this problem. And that's where when you step outside and you start to consider these alternative ways of looking at health, whether it's Chinese medicine or other holistic therapies, you're like, oh, the body is totally connected as a whole. Like,
Yeah,
and there's these ways of understanding how everything relates. And then I just feel like it makes so much more intuitive sense to look at it that way, right?
very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you struggling with ongoing bloating, diarrhea, constipation, or autoimmune symptoms and feel like you've hit a wall trying to get the answers you're looking for from your doctor? Do you feel like you prefer a natural solution to your health issues rather than a drug based symptom band aid? And deep down, do you feel like if you could just get to the root cause of this problem, you could solve it? That was my experience too, and I'm here to tell you that you can resolve your health struggles through a holistic approach. I'm Courtney Cowie, and I help ambitious and resourceful lifelong learners get to the root cause of their gut and autoimmune symptoms so they can confidently pursue their goals, be active, and enjoy life to the fullest. If this is you and you want an easy and proven place to start, click the link below to download my free e-guide. It contains my top 3 tips for resolving chronic diarrhea and other gut struggles based on my own personal experience and experience helping hundreds of clients. So I want to dive into the topic of parasites a little bit, Brehan.
Oh, fun. Okay.
I know that you studied under Heiner Fruhoff, which for the listening audience is a well-known teacher in Chinese herbal medicine, classically trained. He's written a number of papers on this concept of goose syndrome. And goose syndrome, I'm going to let you explain that, but there is a relationship to parasites. And so this is probably a topic I found super fascinating years ago when I was first reading through all this stuff. And I think the person listening might actually find this to be really interesting from an IBS perspective too.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So the first thing that I want to dispel a lot of myths around parasites before I dive into how we really look at them and treat them because they are real. They do cause gut problems. Like nobody should be arguing with that. I
Yeah.
think recently recently I had a video on TikTok get over 7 million views talking about a worm that a famous sorry, not health, food influencer on that platform was seen eating a piece of sushi that had a worm hanging off of the sushi while he ate it. Like everybody could see it.
Oh
And
gosh.
and it caused a huge controversy. And I made a video, saying like, dude, you got to look at this. Like, this is not okay. He was fine. He said, he made a follow-up to that and said he's got no problems at all. Somebody who ate at the same restaurant that week ended up in the hospital emergency room.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing with parasites. And that video triggered, I made a whole series about this because people were saying in the comments of that video, it got over 7 million views. They're saying, this is why you need to be cleansing every full moon. This is why you need to deworm yourself all the time. This is why I keep a
Mm.
tube of ivermectin in my refrigerator. Like it's for horses, but I suck on it once a month. It's like this is not necessary. There are times and places, like there are places in the world where people live that are exposed to parasites constantly. And most of the people who live in that area their whole life, they're fine with the parasites. And there's
Mhm.
tons of evidence showing that as we have evolved on this planet, we're, parasites are right there with us. So there's some evidence showing that hookworms in the right dose can actually reverse autoimmune disease and allergies for some people. This is
Mhm.
being studied in research environments. Not all parasites are bad, and it's the same deal. There's very preliminary evidence showing that things like tapeworms even can be helpful for some of us because some of what the worm does inside our body actually helps our body with some of the things that it should be doing all the time. This is
Mhm.
the hygiene hypothesis. We've been evolving along with viruses, bacteria, parasites are the entire time we've been on this planet. And while, again, it's a balance issue. So in a person that has been raised in a fairly hygienic, fairly sanitary environment for what we would consider that way, for the most part, which is a lot of Western civilization, Western society, um, we're not habituated towards a healthy relationship with parasites. And thus, if we get one, we need to treat it. We need to get it out. If you've grown up in an environment where they are endemic and everybody has them, you may not be in that situation, and deworming yourself all the time may actually be causing you harm. So when it comes to parasites in Chinese medicine, parasites are endemic to China and have been for a very long time. And much of Chinese medicine has evolved in environments in China which are extremely damp, extremely swampy, riddled with mold, places where people grow a lot, tend to harbor a lot of biofilm. And parasites and biofilm really love each other. Parasites create
Mhm.
biofilm, this is mucus, and we need to have a certain amount of mucus to survive. Otherwise, our stomachs would just dissolve us from the inside out. It'd be very painful. But we shouldn't have too much. Biofilm is a place where lots of infections can hide. So when it comes to goose syndrome, um, because people have noticed over time how parasites can be harmful, some not so great people have also noticed that parasites can be used as a weapon. And
Mm.
the idea of goo is the character sort of means possession. And so it's one of these things that originates in areas of China where the closest analogy we have in English would be something called like black magic. And so
Mhm.
the stories that are told about this are of people who will take a really nasty poisonous insect, like a centipede, or something like a spider, and they will sometimes leave it in someone else's bedroom and allow it to bite them and cause them harm. There are also stories of people taking all the creepy crawlies you can think of, all the nasty worms and centipedes and spiders and scorpions and poisonous snakes, anything venomous, anything gross and dangerous to humans, and they put them all in a pot put the lid on the pot, bury the pot under the ground, let them fight it out in there, and then whichever one wins is the goo. And you use that and you go and like you kind of like curse somebody with it.
Mhm.
And whether it's infecting them with something from their venom or crawling in their ear and laying eggs or doing something really, really, wreaking psychiatric havoc on their brain and their neurological system. Um, this is where the concept originates from.
Mhm.
And what Heiner did, what my mentor did, is that when he first started his clinical practice, because in the world of Chinese medicine, we have great success record with chronic illnesses. Western medicine doesn't necessarily address very well. And so I think a big part of a lot of Chinese medicine professionals' practices are people who feel cast aside by Western medicine. And they have symptoms and a clinical history that don't line up with any kind of available effective treatment. And so we get some people walking in the door talking about really weird stuff. And
Mhm.
Heiner would treat these people appropriately. And they would sometimes, and he would even use the Chinese medicine formulas and patterns that were appropriate for them, and they would get better for a while, and then they would get worse. And then they would get better for a while, and then they would get worse. And he went back and did a lot of research into goo, and he realized some analogies there behind goo toxins, goo poisons, goo parasites, and chronic infections. And Lyme disease and its co-infections are a great example of this. And so he's really made a name for himself and a career based on taking the principles of goo and applying them to treatment for chronic infections that way. So that's really where that idea comes from. So if you see an acupuncturist or a Chinese medicine provider and they say you have goo syndrome, it doesn't necessarily mean you're possessed. It may mean that they're putting those cultural folk tales around possession, around parasitology, into a context of a modern chronic illness. And if it leads to effective treatment, I'm all for it.
Oh, for sure. So this kind of leads into a question. I think this is kind of getting in a couple of thoughts I had as we were talking here, which is why do you think in modern world we're seeing more and more of these complex presentations of illness? And kind of the second part to this question is, do you think some of this has an inherited trauma slash intergenerational component to it? And that kind of gets back to that whole chi, right? Like the chi through the kidneys, right? And or do you
Mhm.
think it's truly more so environmental, like the environments we live in and the exposures we get, whether they're antibiotics or shots or denatured food or Wi-Fi, all the things. Like, what do you kind of see as sort of explaining why we're seeing more of this, Brehan?
Um, uh, I think those are two very important questions. They're very different things.
Yeah.
So I'll speak to the intergenerational piece of it first, because
Okay.
I really interested in this, and having had some of the clinical experiences I have had. So one thing that Chinese medicine does really well, that's not currently explained well by Western medicine. So one of my passions is explaining and validating classical Chinese medicine concepts with biomedical science. This is how I reach a very large audience on social media, is by using the lingua franca that we all share, which is science, which is describing these things in a reductionist, repeatable fashion that are concepts that otherwise would seem very esoteric and very hard to quantify. And some of them still
Mhm.
are. And intergenerational trauma is one of those. But
Mhm.
the specific instance that I'd like to talk about, the story I'd like to share about this are the patients who have um, experiences, whether they're in dreams or even waking visions of their ancestors, whether they're having experiences, conveying experiences to them, conveying wisdom or messages to them. And this is something that it sounds crazy to talk about, but like every culture on earth has ghost stories. Every culture on earth talks about the afterlife, talks about, ways that we respect our ancestors and sometimes even directly communicate with them. And
Mhm.
even if we can't yet articulate in modern scientific language how that happens, because it's so universal, there must be something there. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that ghosts are alive and walking amongst us. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. That's not the point of what I'm trying to talk about. It's that there is neurologically some kind of phenomenon occurring that connects people to the experiences of their ancestors. And we have enough biomedical evidence to show that in nematodes, in talking about parasites, in worms, I
Mhm.
believe it's earthworms that have been studied. I could be wrong about that. Um, the experiences of an ancestor, I think it's 8 generations previous, changes the genetic expression which carries on through that genetic line. I don't believe that research has been done in humans yet, but the just seeing it in one biological animal species says to me, okay, there's something possible.
I was just gonna
A
say, I think the
genetic,
Holocaust Jews actually they've done some research in that, like how that Holocaust
that would
has
not
like,
surprise me at all.
yeah,
I think I have seen an article about that. Yeah.
yeah,
And so all of us originated from an egg and a sperm.
yep.
And the egg that created us was present in our mother's ovary when she was a fetus in her grandmother, in my grandmother, right?
Is that
So
crazy?
yeah, so the neuroendocrine patterning that my grandmother had,
Yeah.
very easily that chemical signature could have impacted the egg in some
Yes.
way. And then
Yeah.
that egg became me.
Exactly.
And that's only 2 generations back, but
Mhm.
like that makes sense. It's a pretty
Totally.
direct relationship.
Totally.
The dreams that people experience regularly of their ancestors speaking to them or going through something, I think we can't ignore that. I think there has to be more there that we understand. And I think that plays a huge role in health and
Yeah.
illness. Chinese medicine has always talked about dream interpretation, and it's not anything weird. It's like, you know, dreams of people fighting oftentimes correlate with them fighting an infection or some kind of immune system activity. Like if you're getting in fights all the time, like
Mhm.
I hear that from my patients when they're fighting a new virus, when they're fighting a reactivated or lingering virus that like came out of the woodwork and they're dealing with it for the first time.
Mhm.
This manifests in our subconscious very directly.
Mhm.
I had a patient with severe neuropathy in her legs and feet. She had lacked feeling in her feet, and frequently people with foot neuropathy will talk about it feels like they're walking on jello or something like that. She had recurring dreams of going down and it's because their nerves are not working, and like the electrical wiring is not working in the legs. And she had dreams, recurring dreams of walking downstairs into the basement of her house, and it was flooded and she was turning the light switch on and nothing was happening. And that was a
Oh.
dream that happened for her over and over again. And I'm like, this is pretty clear. Like you've got an electrical signaling problem in the bottom part of your body, which is the place where your mind lives.
Right.
And her diagnosis was cold and damp. That's what we
Mhm.
use in Chinese medicine to describe the pathogenesis of illness. And a flooded basement. Like, how much more obvious does it get?
Yeah.
Um, your subconscious just telling you, like, hey, this is what's going on. In terms
No,
of
go
like
ahead.
why we see so much more chronic illness now, I think it's actually because emergency medicine has become so good.
Mm.
So we have lower infant mortality rates than ever, and we
Mhm.
have um, we have life-saving measures in terms of accidents and uh, infections and injuries that 150 years ago we didn't have. And I think that I think the most direct and hygiene practices and food safety, and none of that is perfect, and there's a lot of problems we can talk about in the world, but I think, and I'm not an epidemiologist either, but I think the main reason that we see more chronic illness is because people don't die of stuff that used to kill us all the time. We just get through the critical phase of that, and then rather than dying, we just kind of linger on
Hmm.
and decline slowly. And I think there is a role to play in that with food quality, with architecture and mold in buildings, with uh, like I'm not a 5G conspiracy theorist, but I think the fact that we're surrounding ourselves with a lot more electromagnetic radiation than ever before, it's doing something. It can't
Oh,
not be.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know the degree to which it is causing illness or contributing, but it's playing a role. Probably social media is playing a huge role in the development of chronic illness, especially mental illness.
For sure.
And I don't, yeah, I don't know all the causes, but I think the main one is probably just that we live through a lot of stuff that we used to die from.
Really
Infection I had
ill.
when I was 2 would have killed me. With the exception of if I had lived in China and had access to a really skilled herbalist, because there are herbs that work just as well as antibiotics. That being said, if you're struggling with a life-threatening bacterial infection, please take antibiotics. Please don't call me. Like I'm really comfortable in that situation. If you like live in my town and can come to my practice and I can monitor you and I can send you to the hospital if you need it, but I don't want people emailing me off the internet saying like, "Hey, I'm in sepsis. What plants do I need to drink?" Like,
Oh God.
don't do that. Take the
Too funny.
antibiotics.
Like, no, that's so funny. Like, just quick little story on that. When this was many years ago, when I was going through my body work licensure and training, we all had to shadow an acupuncturist who was from China. Like, he ran a Chinese
Mhm.
medical massage school. Like, there were these old farmers that had just eschewed doctors, and they would come in there. They'd have these super serious things going on. He'd be like,
Oh
okay,
yeah.
you get down on table and I will do some acupuncture. And we'd be like, oh my God, we can't believe Dr. Joe is treating this guy. He needs to go to the emergency room. Like it was just
Yeah.
funny.
I've treated emergency appendicitis cases. I've treated
Have
emergency
you?
diverticulitis cases. Yeah, successfully. These people did not require surgery or antibiotics, and they were able to
Yeah.
recover completely.
Yeah.
Um, those situations were people in either my immediate family or very close friends that had like they were able to tell me right like I was the person they called before they went to the emergency room, and they
Yeah.
said, "This is going on. Do I need to go to the ER? I'd really rather not go to the emergency room." And I said, "Let me check you out." And
Mhm.
we worked through it that way. But we were close enough that if an emergency visit was necessary, they could have done it. And
Right.
for unless you have access to somebody who's skilled and is able to do that and make that call and has the tools and the experience and the training necessary to help you through that naturally, rely on conventional medical world and then use Chinese medicine to recover. Like because like that's most of what I tell people is like if you need antibiotics, just take the antibiotics. I'll get you through that like we'll fix it later. But
Mhm.
if you don't survive, like all of the the prebiotic foods and the dietary therapy and the qigong and the abdominal massage and the herbs are not like it's not going to be worth anything to you. So
Yeah,
live.
no, I'm totally with you. There's definitely a time and place to just go straight to the doctor. Like, no joke on that
Yeah.
one for sure. And your theory about people living through things nowadays that they weren't able to like hundreds of years ago is really interesting. And I can definitely see how in your story, especially that probably would have been the case, right? If you wouldn't have had like truly like those life-saving antibiotics
Yeah.
as intervention. Um, it's interesting too, because the training I come from, we really look at just how as the food quality has broken down over the years, we could argue since like post World War II, right? We had to start to put preservatives into
Sure.
things, and we're just
Yeah.
seeing, I
Less
think,
fiber and not as
yeah,
fresh. Like
less
all,
fresh, less whole foods, right? Like people are just not constitutionally as strong as they used to be. And even the work of like Weston A. Price, looking at just the bone structures on people's faces when he traveled the world and like comparing grandma to the child that was eating like the cakes and the pastries, right? Like there was such a significant difference in how they looked physically speaking in terms of their robustness. So yeah, I think it's so many things. It's hard to kind of like pick out like what is that one critical factor. I think we socially are living in a very isolated space. People are on screens more than they ever have been. They sit more than they ever have been, right? Like all of these things play a role for sure.
very
And
much
do
so.
you find that even though things have changed in our kind of like our social circumstances, our environments, our food, that the medicine, like herbal medicine specifically in Chinese medicine, still proves to be as effective as it ever has, like even compared to hundreds of years ago?
Oh, if not more so. So the when we when people in the West think about herbs from China, they're not often familiar with how mature and complex of an industry it is. So, 1.3 billion people, and a lot of them are using herbal medicine. There's going to be a very wide spectrum of quality, and you're going to find, and in fact, they have, the official, like the academic industry in China has a quality scale that they use to grade herbal products, and so, it starts with like first of all, anything that's C grade is great. Like that's
Mhm.
fine. It's the right species. It's harvested at the right time. It's cleared from harmful pesticides and heavy metals, and it's safe. And
Mhm.
it has an adequate amount of the active pharmacological ingredients. And so like one of the things about the maturity of Chinese herbal medicine in the modern era that hasn't really made it over to the U.S. is that um, uh, the government of China, which has, like any government, does some great things, some not great things, and I'm not here to defend them, other than to say they have poured billions of dollars into the mechanistic research of Chinese medicine. So the
Mm.
understanding not if it works, they do some of that too, but
Mhm.
how.
Okay.
And so they're looking into the act. So we have figured out for the most part what are the active pharmacological compounds of medicinal plants, and what potency do they need to be in a plant for it to work the way that it's supposed to. And so
Mhm.
they can lab test this. And so the plants get graded on a quality scale this way. And there's also things, the traditional visual inspection. Is it the right color? Was it harvested at the right time? How big are the buds, or what, the seeds, or whatever it is that you're using? All of that plays a role. But then they can also like take lab samples and look at it in high performance liquid chromatography and figure out like, oh, well, it's got enough of this volatile oil and it's got enough of this uh, bitter alkaloid to have this effect biochemically.
Mhm.
Um, there are plants that do not meet that specification, which are still packaged into products and shipped overseas and shipped and sold in China. And if you're buying from major online retail centers like Amazon, for example, you're not always getting the best quality stuff, even if it's
Oh
from a
gosh, yeah.
label or a brand that you think it should be.
Yeah.
If you are sourcing appropriately, though, you're getting from a company that does independent lab testing to verify that what they say is on the label is actually what's in the product. You can be pretty reasonably sure that what you're getting is just as, if not more potent than would have been 100 years ago, 200 years
Mhm.
ago, because they, in addition to not throwing out the traditional methods of characterizing what's quality, like where is it grown, um, how large is the plant, how beautiful is the color, all of those, what does it taste like? They still do taste testing. They
Mhm.
also have all of the laboratory characteristics they use to qualify these plants. So I think like there is low quality. There are a lot of low quality herbs that come out of China. There are also herbs that are so potent that we don't even need to use the same doses of them that we used to even 20 years ago,
Mhm.
because they're some herbs can be like they're semi-wild. They're sustainably wild crafted in that uh, um, usually it'll be a family or a group of families that will be owning a certain parcel of land where these things are traditionally grown in the wild. What they'll do is they'll go and they'll walk out and they'll like find a cluster of the plant growing, and they'll take a small section of that plant, uproot it, and like if it's growing along the path of a stream, they'll go and plant it along several different places. So they're taking a wild plant, cutting, sections of it off, replanting it, and allowing all of those to grow. So it is the wild plant. It is sort of helped along its way by humans, and then they'll harvest enough that they have some product to offer, but they'll leave the rest of it there to keep growing.
Mhm.
Uh, these are often considered to be some of the highest quality plants that are available. And when they do lab studies on them, they find like, oh, the active pharmacological compounds are way higher in that than in something that's monocropped.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is make sure you source your herbs from a very knowledgeable herbalist, right?
Yeah.
Which which
Reputable
is
source is a good idea.
yes, which is so true in my field as well. It's like the whole DIY where you go to Amazon and you self-select what you think is going to work for you. You're going to waste a lot of time and resources and often potentially even make yourself worse doing that because you're either getting a very low grade thing, it's not doing what you think it's going to do, and or you just don't
Yeah.
have the understanding to use it properly, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, before we wrap up, Brehan, is there anything else you wanted to speak to specifically to the topic of IBS, IBD in the sense of Chinese medicine?
Um, Specific to IBS, I'd really love to just impart to people like that doesn't really mean anything other than you have symptoms.
Mhm.
And dig deeper, ask be polite, but be the squeaky wheel. Ask your doctor to look a little bit deeper into what's causing this. Take a better, more thorough history, because the we when you dive in, it's really not hard to figure out what's going on that's causing this, and then that usually does lead to effective treatment pretty fast.
Nice. I love that. And then for the listening audience, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is to go to my website. It's just crawford-wellness.com. You can find me on social media platforms. My handle is usually Crawford_wellness. And I
Mhm.
co-founded a company called Chorus for Life, which helps people deal with eating food in the real world and not hurting. And we have a free Qigong class we teach twice a week. We also do a Q&A in there. If people listen to this and have a ton of questions, just show up, ask them there. I'll be happy to answer.
Oh, I love that. Is your class like over the internet so people could participate from all over the
Yeah,
place? Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's in a school group. I can give you the link to that.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Are there any other free resources you want to share? Or is that the main one?
Oh, that's the main one.
That's the
Yeah,
main one.
there's
Okay,
there
perfect.
well, and when they join that group, which is free, it's on School, SKOOL, they get a free PDF with all of, kind of my distilled best practices for gut health. And
I love
then
it.
we run a free class twice a week teaching Qigong that has a lot of healthy effects on digestion. And we also have a Q&A.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I think there isn't a lot of like, understanding or, at least for me, I don't have a great Qigong resource I would give people if they were interested. So I think that's awesome you're doing that because it's such a supportive way of really getting experience with that idea of, okay, what is chi energy, right? Like, how do you kind of
Yeah.
engage with this and build that in the body? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very easy to cultivate and feel. And we love doing that with people. My business partner and I lead those classes twice a week. They're on Zoom in our school group.
Perfect.
And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's very safe and it has a huge benefit for people.
Oh yeah. I think it's a very kind of gentle form of movement. And, if you feel like you're limited and super ill and can't do a lot, this would actually be, I think, a great place to start, right?
Very much so. That's how it's designed. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I so appreciate you coming on the podcast today. It was an awesome conversation. I learned a lot and I had studied a little bit of Chinese medicine, so this was really great. And I think people are really going to take away a lot of things to think about just in terms of a different way of looking at gut health. Is certainly much different than what their doctor is going to say, right? But even different than functional medicine. So this is another just tool set to kind of use, right, as a consumer of health information out there to make good decisions.
Thank you so much for having me on, Courtney.
Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.